Tu fais le test son?
Oui, we are here we are à Paris avec Jérôme Topilien, etc.
I don't believe we've been formally introduced. My name is Jürgen Anger.
Any relation to Kenneth?
I think not.
You know, I've really been a cinephile from a very young age, and as a kid, my parents took me to a lot of films. Even though we were in the country, I was raised on a farm, but they were also cinephiles. They took us to a lot of Hollywood films. And then I went to university and studied film. I took 2 years of production and then switched to cinema studies because I thought filmmaking was too complicated. And I got my master's degree in film and social political thought, and then started making Super 8 experimental films in the punk scene in Toronto, and it led to a career in film. Because my films have always been more experimental, I started out showing them in not only punk bars and gay bars, but in also alternative art spaces, and so I've continued that tradition, and became early on. I was represented by an art gallery, Paris Projects, starting from the early 2000s. And I've always been a photographer as well as a filmmaker, so I consider myself an artist, and I do performance and installations in galleries, and quite often, I mean, I like to think of myself as a filmmaker first, but quite often there's a long time between making films, and so I do other things between films, like photography.
What do you mean I can't get in? I'm wearing a uniform.
Terrorists only.
I'm a terrorist. Look at me.
You're not a terrorist, you're a Nazi. Nazis so 5 minutes ago. You gotta start thinking outside the concentration camp.
But I tell you, I'm a terrorist.
Honey, terrorists ain't fascists. Terrorists are against fascists. You got the wrong party. Liebchen, next.
I was bored with the gay scene, which I thought was very conventional and bourgeois, so I went to the punk scene, and in the punk scene I found there was a lot of homophobia at that time in the 80s, so in the late 80s. So I started making very confrontational films with homosexual content, with explicit sex, as a kind of provocation to make a comment on certain radical people who perhaps aren't as open-minded as they think they are, and also I just always wanted to present homosexuality in a very unapologetic way, to not shy away from showing it very explicitly, the sexuality. A lot of liberals claim to accept homosexuality, but if they're shown something very explicit, it tests their liberalism, perhaps. So, but again, it was also just partly the milieu that I was in. It was a documentation of me and my friends and what we were doing. So it was kind of natural in a way to make films. My most challenging film, even for myself and for the audiences, was Skin Flick, which was a porn movie about neo-Nazi skinheads. and it was a movie that really explored the sort of historical relationship between homosexuality and fascism. So it was very, it's a very harsh movie. There's a scene with a neo-Nazi skinhead who jerks off onto a copy of Mein Kampf, for example. So there was picketers outside of the theater when it played in Toronto and London, and I had a lot of hostile reactions towards the film, and I had to stand up and defend it many times. So that was probably the film where I pushed the envelope the hardest.
Tell me about the old men. Did they die?
I saw one get zipped into a buddy bag. I also gave one a sponge bath.
Was it gross?
Not really. Somebody has to do it.
You're such a saint.
I'm not a saint.
I started making experimental films in Toronto, and I made my first 2 feature-length films in Toronto. It was always difficult to make the kind of work I was making in Canada at that time, late 80s, early 90s. I mean, Canada at that time actually was notorious for censoring even mainstream films. Right up until the early 90s, mid-90s. You know, there was a very strong censorship board in Ontario. So, you know, the even scenes that would now be considered fairly mild were considered pornographic or unacceptable. The labs would call the police and try to confiscate my negatives, and I was censored by customs all the time when I tried to send my films outside the country or back to the country. So, partly it was to escape that kind of censorship, and you know, I always had a fantasy of LA, and so with my first film, I got the opportunity to visit LA and show my film there. And then I really fell in love with the city, not because of Hollywood, but because of the underground of LA, the crazy kind of underbelly of the city that no one really talks about as much. And then I had a producer from the very beginning, from my very first film, who was based in Berlin. So he invited me to Berlin, and it just was more practical in some ways, to make films with him in Berlin, because he was financing the films. But also I fell in love with Berlin for completely different reasons, because it's such an amazing city historically, and it's such a kind of a dark, brooding city, the exact opposite of LA. I shot 2 films in LA, 2 films in Berlin, kind of like night and day. And finally, I thought it was time to go back to Canada and try to get some financing there, having made a reputation outside of the country.
I would give anything just to see a nice pair of tits again.
We shall overcome.
Are you sure that's it?
What?
I used to have these lines memorized.
You can read them to me?
The idea with Gerontophilia from the beginning was to make a film with a bigger budget and in a completely different style from my previous work. And it was attached to producers who who got the financing from governmental agencies. I wrote a script that could be financed by these agencies, and it was meant for me from the very beginning to be a complete departure from my other work. I felt like I'd explored the pornographic realm quite thoroughly. I was feeling a bit boxed in, to be honest, because there was a expectation for me to each time make a film that was more shocking, more pornographic, more extreme. And I thought it would be a challenge to make a completely different style of film with a completely different process. You know, it doesn't necessarily represent a new direction for me. It's just trying something different.
Do you know where the Burroughs books are?
These old men are being over-medicated.
I was in rather good shape, don't you think?
I like the way you look now.
The young man has a girlfriend, and he's not gay, or not gay identified, and he has this relationship with an older man who is gay and who was raised in a different generation where homosexuality was taboo and where he was rejected by his family because of his homosexuality. So he's more of a kind of a traditional gay kind of character from a different generation, and that's part of the cultural difference between them that they transgress as well. Part of the point of the movie was to choose a strong cultural taboo, a topic that is still confrontational, and to treat it in a kind of style that is more accessible and more romantic and more, perhaps slightly more mainstream. So I think there's certain people who are still turned off or offended by the idea of a relationship, a sexual relationship between an 18-year-old and an 81-year-old. For me, it was very important to emphasize the fetish itself and to have the young male character have a fetish from the very beginning of the film, and to show that he will continue having the fetish at the end of the film. And for some people, that's still shocking.
Got a soft spot for geezers?
I was even married once, if you can believe that.
You'd make a great lesbian.
If only.